Yes, we are recording this. I gotta pull it up. Brooklyn? Yes. For literature, history, and science. Or literature, science, and I think history too. But yes. No, tests they do in the same day. But lessons, they're usually a day behind. That way I can record what I'm doing and they can watch it. Aiden?
So, what would you do if someone brought a bear stool and
I would send them home.
and it talked?
Okay. No more. Chapter 9. What Lucy Saw. All right, as a review. In Chapter 8, Matthew, is this very important? Okay.
Chapter 9 is about as long as Chapter 8.
Yeah? It's not too bad.
It's page 119 to 134.
Mm-hmm. It's 15 pages. Not too bad. All right. What Lucy Saw. Let's review from yesterday. So, in Chapter 8, Trumpkin has finished telling his story to the children, but he's not super excited that the children have come. Why? Why is he not super pumped that the Pevensey children are who showed up from the Horn? Riley?
Well, he thought they were
Okay.
more mature.
There we go. He's like, we were kind of hoping for adults, people that would actually help us. You guys are just kids. What did the children do to prove to him they were worthy of being the heroes that they were? Edgar?
They fighted.
They fight? Right. Who fought? Chunkin was the dwarf. Which Pevensey child did he fight? Peter, Susan, Edmund, or Lucy? Edmund. Good. Why did he not fight Peter? Do you remember? Why did Edmund say, hey, wait, let him fight me and not you? Luke? Good. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so Edmund beat him in a sword fight. What else did they do? How else did they prove their worth? Connor?
Susan beat him in a bow match.
Very good. Susan beat him in a bow match. And what was the last thing? Brooklyn? Very good. Yes. Peter? He didn't do anything. He didn't have to do anything. By the time Peter rolled around, Trumpkin was like, okay, if all your younger siblings are good enough for me to put my faith in, I can put my faith in you too. Does that make sense? All right. So, then they decide they're going to head off to find Prince Caspian, right, and his crew. What are they doing right now in the story? Like, how are they trying to get there? How are they traveling? Manny? By boat up Glasswater Creek. Okay? So here we are. Chapter 9, What Lucy Saw. Susan and the two boys were bitterly tired with rowing before they rounded the last headland and began the final pull up Glasswater itself. And Lucy's head ached from the long hours of sun and the glare on the water. Even Trumpkin longed for the voyage to be over. By the way, why were they safer going up the creek instead of on the ground? Layla? Mm-hmm. Very good. Even Trumpkin longed for the voyage to be over. The seat on which he sat to steer had been made for men, not dwarfs, and his feet did not reach the floorboards. And everyone knows how uncomfortable that is, even for just 10 minutes. And as they all grew more tired, their spirits fell. Up till now, the children had only been thinking of how to get to Caspian. Now they wondered what they would do when they found him. and how a handful of dwarfs and woodland creatures could defeat an army of grown-up humans. Twilight was coming on as they rode slowly up the windings of Glasswater Creek, a twilight which deepened as the banks drew closer together, and the overhanging trees began almost to meet overhead, so it's getting darker and shadier. It was very quiet in here as the sound of the sea died away behind them. They could even hear the trickle of the little streams that poured down from the forest into Glasswater. They went ashore at last, far too tired to attempt lighting a fire, and even a supper of apples, though most of them felt that they never wanted to see an apple ever again, seemed better than trying to catch or shoot anything. After a little silent munching, they all huddled down together in the moss and dead leaves between 4 large beech trees. Everyone except Lucy went to sleep at once. Lucy, being far less tired, found it hard to get comfortable. Also, she had forgotten until now that all dwarfs snore. She knew that one of the best ways of getting to sleep is to stop trying, so she opened her eyes. Through a gap in the bracken and branches, she could just see a patch of water in the creek in the sky above it. Then, with a thrill of memory, she saw again, after all those years, the bright Narnian stars. She had once known them better than the stars of our own world, because, as a queen in Narnia, she had gone to bed much later than as a child in England. And there they were. At least 3 of the summer constellations could be seen from where she lay. So, like the shape of the stars. The ship, the hammer, and the leopard. Dear old leopard, she murmured happily to herself. But instead of getting drowsier, what does drowsier mean? Brooklyn? Good. Instead of getting more and more sleepy, she was getting more awake, with an odd nighttime dreamish kind of wakefulness. You know how you feel when you're trying to go to sleep and you just can't sleep? That's how she feels. Okay? The creek was growing brighter. She knew now that the moon was on it, though she couldn't see the moon. And now she began to feel that the whole forest was coming awake, like herself. Hardly knowing why she did it, she got up quickly and walked a little distance away from their bivouac. What's a bivouac, Matthew? A temporary shelter or camp, yeah. Meaning it's not permanent. You put it up for the night, take it down the next day to keep moving on. This is lovely, said Lucy to herself. It was cool and fresh. Delicious smells were floating everywhere. Somewhere close by she heard the twitter of a nightingale beginning to sing, then stopping, then beginning again. It was a little lighter ahead. She went toward the light and came to a place where there were fewer trees, and whole patches or pools of moonlight. But the moonlight and the shadows were so mixed that you could hardly be sure where anything was or what it was. At the same moment, the nightingale, satisfied at last with his tuning up, burst into a full song. Okay, so this whole description is meant to make you kind of feel like she's awake, okay, but it's almost like the woods are so dark and shady and there's so many creatures and sounds. It's almost kind of magical, okay? And so she's kind of, instead of falling asleep, she's almost waking up, noticing all these crazy things happening. Lucy's eyes began to grow accustomed to the light. What does that mean? Her eyes grew accustomed to the light. Riley? Good. You know how sometimes when you first turn the light off, you can't see anything, but then a few minutes later you can see a little better? Okay? That's how she's feeling now. She's like, okay, now I'm starting to see a little better now. Yes. Yep, exactly. Lucy's eyes began to grow accustomed to the light, and she saw the trees that were nearest her more distinctly. A great longing for the old days when the trees could talk in Narnia came over her. She knew exactly how each of these trees would talk if only she could wake them, and what sort of human form it would put on. So, The next couple of lines in the book, she's going to, based on how the trees look, she's going to imagine what kind of person they would be. Okay? So, like, if the tree looks super long and slender and has lots of bends, she may think it's a ballerina. Or if it's really kind of short and frumpy looking and more bulky and dark, it might be kind of a grumpy old man or something. You know what I'm saying? Based on how the trees look, she's going to imagine what they would be like as people. Okay? She looked at a silver birch. Oh, it would have a soft, showery voice, and it would look like a slender girl with hair blown all around her face and fond of dancing. She looked at the oak. He would be a wizened but hearty old man, with a frizzled beard and warts on his face and hands, and hair growing out of the warts. She looked at the beech under which she was standing. Ah, she would be the best of all. She would be a gracious goddess, smooth and stately, the lady of the wood. Oh, trees, 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 said Lucy, though she had not been intending to speak at all. Oh, trees, wake, wake, wake! Don't you remember it? Don't you remember me? Dryads and hamadryads, come out to me. Remember, the trees, ever since the Telmarines attacked Narnia, the trees have kind of sunk back into themselves and they no longer talk or move. They're no longer alive. Okay? So she's like, come on, guys, come back. Though there was not a breath of wind, they all stirred about her. They all began to move a little bit. The rustling noise of the leaves was almost like words. The nightingale stopped singing as if to listen to it. Lucy felt that at any moment she would begin to understand what the trees were trying to say. But the moment did not come. The rustling died away. The nightingale resumed its song. Even in the moonlight, the wood looked more ordinary again. Yet Lucy had the feeling, as you sometimes have when you are trying to remember a name or a date, and almost get to it, but it vanishes before you really do. She began to feel that she had just missed something, as if she had spoken to the trees a split second too soon or a split second too late, or used all the right words except for one, or put in one word that was just wrong. Okay, so as Lucy's beginning to say, come on, trees, wake up. Come on, trees, wake up. They start to move a little bit, even though there's no wind blowing. Okay, so it's almost like the trees are trying to wake up. And they get just about to where they're alive again, and then everything stops and goes back to normal. Okay? And so Lucy feels kind of how you feel when you have the answer in your head and I call on you and you go, wait, I just had it, I forgot. Okay? That's how Lucy feels. She's like, oh, we were so close, we were right there. Okay? And then quite suddenly she began to feel tired. She went back to the bivouac, snuggled down between Susan and Peter, and was asleep in a few minutes. It was a cold and cheerless waking for them all the next morning, with a gray twilight in the wood, for the sun had not yet risen, and everything was damp and dirty. Does it sound like a fun morning? No. Cold, damp, dirty, kind of dark outside? No, thank you. Yummy. Apples, hey-ho, said Trumpkin with a rueful grin. I must say, you ancient kings and queens don't overfeed your couriers. Is he complaining or is he thankful for the apples? Let me read it again. Watch my face. Oh, apples. Hey ho. I must say, you ancient kings and queens sure don't overfeed your couriers. Is he thankful or is he complaining? Yeah, he's like, you guys certainly don't overfeed us. You barely feed me anything at all. And apples at that. You have to wait a few more minutes, okay? They stood up and shook themselves and looked about. The trees were thick, and they could see no more than a few yards in any direction. I suppose your majesties know the way all right, said the dwarf. I don't, said Susan. I've never seen these woods in my life before. In fact, I thought all along that we ought to have gone by the river. Well, then I think you might have said so at the time, answered Peter with pardonable sharpness. Okay, so Susan's like, hold on. I don't recognize anything. I'm the one that said we should have stayed down by the river where we can just follow the water. And Peter's like, well, you might have said something back then when we first got off the boat. Okay, so they're kind of... Exactly. Everyone's tired, grumpy, sore from rowing all day, and they're kind of fighting. Oh, don't take any notice of her, said Edmund. She always is a wet blanket. What does that mean? Riley?
She's always bothering or like saying things that right and like you said in Connor was on like check or something and
Mm-hmm. So she's always pointing out the what, Brooklyn? The negatives. She's kind of being the party pooper here. Okay? She always is a wet blanket. You've got that pocket compass of yours, Peter, haven't you? Well then, we're right as rain. We've only got to keep going on northwest. Cross that little river, the what do you call it? The Rush... I know, said Peter. The one that joins the big river at the fords of Baruna, or Baruna's Bridge, as the DLF calls it. That's right. Cross it and strike uphill, and we'll be at the stone table, or Aslan's Howe, I mean, by 8 or 9 o'clock. I hope King Cassian will give us a good breakfast. I hope you're right, said Susan. I can't remember all that at all. That's the worst of girls, said Edmund to Peter and the dwarf. They never carry a map in their heads. He's like, girls get lost all the time. And Lucy said, that's because our heads have something inside them, said Lucy. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
So Edmund's like, that's the problem with girls. They can't ever carry a map in their heads. They never know where they're going. And Lucy says, that's because we have other things in our head. As in, you don't have anything else in your head but a map. At first, things seemed to be going pretty well. They even thought they had struck an old path. But if you know anything about woods, you will know that one is always finding imaginary paths. They disappear about 5 minutes afterwards, and then you think you have found another one. And hope it is not another, but more of the same one. And then that one also disappears. And after you've been well lured out of your right direction, you realize that none of them were actually paths at all. Very easy to get lost in these woods. The boys and the dwarf, however, were used to woods and were not taken in for more than a few seconds. They had plodded on for about half an hour, 3 of them very stiff from yesterday's rowing, when Trumpkin suddenly whispered, "Stop!" They all stopped. "There's something following us," he said in a low voice, "or rather, something keeping up with us, over there on the left." They all stood still, listening and staring till their ears and eyes ached. "You and I'd better each have an arrow on the string," said Susan to Trumpkin. The dwarf nodded, and when both bows were ready for action, the party went on again. They went a few dozen yards through fairly open woodland, keeping a sharp lookout. Then they came to a place where the undergrowth thickened, and they had to pass nearer to it. Just as they were passing the place, there came a sudden something that snarled and flashed, rising out from the breaking twigs like a thunderbolt. Lucy was knocked down and winded, hearing the twang of a bowstring as she fell. When she was able to take notice of things again, she saw a great, grim-looking gray bear lying dead with Trumpkin's arrow in its side. What had been hunting them? Caleb? The bear. The DLF beat you in that shooting match, Sue, said Peter, with a slightly forced smile. Even he had been shaken by this adventure. I left it too late, said Susan in an embarrassed voice. I was so afraid it might be, well, you know, one of our kind of bears, a talking bear. She hated killing things. Why did Susan hesitate? Why did she wait to shoot? She saw the bear. She could have shot. Why did she hold off and wait? Aiden?
Because she wanted to make sure that it was a good or not.
She wasn't sure if it was a good bear or a wild bear. Remember, now in Narnia, there's
No,
both.
Ethan.
Brooklyn? Yes, that's true. That's the trouble of it, said Trumpkin. When most of the beasts have gone enemy and gone dumb, but there are still some of the other kind left. You never know, and you dare not wait to see. What does he mean by that? You never know, and you dare not wait and find out. Connor?
He's basically saying you don't know whether it's a good bear or a bad bear, but you don't want to wait to find out, otherwise, oh, hey, it could be a talking bear that goes, oh, hey, or it could be a bad bear that goes, ow.
Correct. And you could be dead if you wait too long. Poor old Bruin, said Susan. You don't think he was? No, not he, said the dwarf. I saw his face and heard the snarl. He only wanted little girl for his breakfast. Who was he attacking? Riley? Lucy. And talking of breakfast, I didn't want to discourage your majesties when you said you hoped King Caspian would give you a good one, but, meat is precious scarce in the camp. And there's good eating on a bear. It would be a shame to leave this carcass here without taking a bit. And it won't delay us more than half an hour. I dare say you two youngsters, kings, I should say, you guys know how to skin a bear, right? Okay, so now that he's killed the bear, he's like, listen, we're now going to have to skin this bear and take some of the meat to cook later for dinner. Because there's not a whole lot of food at the camp. Okay, let's go and sit down a fair way off, said Susan to Lucy. I know what a horrid, messy business that will be. Why did Susan say, yeah, let's go way over this way while they do this? Manny? Yep. Yeah, no, it's not a scene for girls. Lucy shuddered and nodded. When they had sat down, she said, such a horrible idea has come into my head, Sue. Riley, do you have a question?
Yeah.
What's that?
Shouldn't they start a fire?
They will. They will eventually. But they're gonna save. I think they're gonna save the meat to cook later, when they're ready to eat it.
And also, shouldn't they take the arrow out and put the calling them?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good point. I think they do take it out, but I'm not sure. A horrible idea has come into my head, Sue. What's that? Wouldn't it be dreadful if someday in our own world at home, men started going wild inside like the animals here, and still looked like men, so that you'd never know which were which? Okay, so Lucy says, I just thought about something. You know how in Narnia, sometimes there's good bears and sometimes there's bad bears, and you never can really tell which one it is? What if in our world, humans started going evil and wild on the inside, but they look normal on the outside, so that you could never tell who's a good guy and who's a bad guy? You think that happens sometimes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can happen all the time in humanity across the world. We've got enough to bother about here and now in Narnia, said the practical Susan, without imagining things like that. It's almost like the author is trying to give us a warning, right? Be on the lookout for people who look like good humans but may actually be bad humans on the inside. Brooklyn? Oh. Yeah. That's terrible. Alright, last two, and we gotta keep on motoring or we're gonna have homework. Layla? Correct, but there are some people who are intelligently evil. So they look like normal people, but they really have bad intentions on the inside. Kidnappers, things like that. Mm-hmm. The Bible calls them wolf in sheep's clothing. So it's someone who's actually very dangerous, but they're disguised like something that is the problem. Mm-hmm. Aiden, last one.
So an example of that is like someone can like see like, hey, I'm talking to my car, want to compete? And you just sort of the bitch driving in the car and grab it.
That's true. When they rejoined the boys and the dwarf, as much as they thought they could carry of the best meat had been cut off. Raw meat is not really a nice thing to fill one's pockets with, but they folded it up in fresh leaves and made the best of it. They were all experienced enough to know that they would feel quite differently about these squashy and unpleasant parcels when they had walked long enough to be really hungry. On they trudged again, stopping to wash 3 pairs of hands that needed it in the first stream they passed, until the sun rose and the birds began to sing, and more flies than they wanted were buzzing in the bracken. The stiffness from yesterday's rowing began to wear off. Everybody's spirits rose. The sun grew warmer, and they took their helmets off and carried them. I suppose we are going the right way, said Edmund about an hour later. Well, I don't see how we can go wrong as long as we don't bear too much to the left, said Peter. If we bear too much to the right, the worst that can happen is wasting a little time by striking the great river too soon, and not cutting off the corner. And again they trudged on with no sound except the thud of their feet and the jingle of their chain shirts. My goodness, where's this bummy rush got to? Said Edmund a good deal later. They're having a hard time finding this river rush that they thought they knew where it was. Go fast. And then, Connor, I'll let you go. I don't know. I certainly thought we'd have struck it by now, said Peter. But there's nothing to do but keep on. They both knew that the dwarf was looking anxiously at them, but he said nothing. And, okay, so you have to understand, both Peter and Edmund have been claiming they know the way the whole time. Now they're seeming kind of lost, and the dwarf's like, you guys told me you know where you were going. And still they trudged on, and their mail shirts began to feel very hot and heavy. What on earth? Said Peter suddenly. They had come, without even seeing it, almost to the edge of a small precipice, which was like a cliff. They had walked to the edge of a cliff, from which they looked down into a gorge with a river at the bottom. On the far side of the cliffs rose much higher. None of the party, except Edmund, and perhaps Trumpkin, was a rock climber. I'm sorry, said Peter. It's my fault for coming this way. We're lost. I've never seen this place in my life before. The dwarf gave a low whistle between his teeth. Oh, do let's go back and go the other way, said Susan. I knew all along we'd get lost in the woods. Susan, said Lucy reproachfully, don't nag at Peter like that. It's so rotten, and he's doing all he can. And don't you snap at Sue like that either, said Edmund. I think she's quite right. Tubs and tortoise shells, exclaimed Trumpkin. If we've got lost coming, what chance do we have of finding our way back? And if we're to go back to the island and begin all over again, even supposing we could do that, we might as well give the whole thing up. Miraz will have finished with Cassian before we get there at that rate. You think we ought to go on? Said Lucy. Well, I'm not sure the High King is actually lost, said Trumpkin. What's to hinder this river from being the rush? Okay, so he's like, how do you know this river that we're looking at isn't actually the river rush? Well, because the rush is not in a gorge, said Peter, keeping his temper with some difficulty. Your Majesty says is, replied the dwarf. But oughtn't you to say was? You knew this country hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years ago. May it not have changed? A landslide might have pulled off half the side of that hill, leaving bare rock, and there are your precipices beyond the gorge. Then the rush might go on deepening its course year after year till you get the little precipices on this side. Or there might have been an earthquake or anything else. What is Trumpkin's point? Manny? Very good. Very good. Remember how we learned about how canyons are formed? By a river cutting through an area over a long period of time? Trumpkin says, well, if you were here hundreds of years ago, who's to say that this river wasn't actually like on level ground way back then? This might actually be the river you're talking about. Oh, I never thought of that, said Peter. And anyway, continued Trumpkin, even if this is not the Rush, it's flowing roughly north, and so it must fall into the Great River anyway. I think I passed something that might have been it on my way down. So if we go downstream to our right, we'll hit the Great River. Perhaps not so high as we'd hoped, but at least we'll be no worse off than if you'd come my way. Trumpkin, you're a brick, said Peter. Come on then, down this side of the gorge. Look! 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 Cried Lucy. Where? What? Asked everyone. The lion! Said Lucy. That's Aslan himself! Didn't you see? Her face had changed completely and her eyes shone. Do you really mean? Began Peter. Where did you think you saw him? Asked Susan. Don't talk like a grown-up, said Lucy, stamping her foot. I didn't think I saw him. I saw him. Where, Lou? Asked Peter. Right up there, between those mountain ashes. No, this side of the gorge. And up, not down. Just the opposite of the way you want to go. And he wanted us to go where he was. Up there. How do you know that was what he wanted? Asked Edmund. I just know, said Lucy. By his face. The others all looked at each other in puzzled silence. Her Majesty may well have seen a lion, put in Trumpkin. There are lions in these woods, I've been told, but it need not have been a friendly and talking lion any more than that bear was a friendly and talking bear. Oh, don't be so stupid, said Lucy. Do you think I don't know Aslan when I see him? Well, I mean, he'd be a pretty elderly lion by now, said Trumpkin, if he's one that you knew when you were here before. I mean, he's been hundreds of years, right? He could have been a lot older. And if it even could be the same one, what's to prevent him from having gone wild and witless like so many of the other animals? Remember, Trumpkin is doubting. He's putting in all these reasons why they shouldn't believe her. Very good. Lucy turned crimson, which is a very deep red. Why is she turning red? Ian? She is so mad. She's like, no, I know we're supposed to follow Aslan. We are supposed to trust in him and believe in him, and no one is listening to me. Hold on, we gotta finish. Lucy turned crimson, and I think she would have flown at Trumpkin if Peter had not laid his hand on her arm. The GLF doesn't understand. How could he? You must just take it, Trumpkin, that we do really know about Aslan. A little bit about him, I mean. And you mustn't ever talk about him like that again. It isn't lucky for one thing, and it's all nonsense for another. The only question is whether Aslan was really there. But I know he was, said Lucy, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, Lou, but we don't, you see, said Peter. Well, there's nothing for it but to put it to a vote, said Edmund. All right, replied Peter. You're the eldest, DLF. What do you vote for? Up or down? Remember, up is the way Aslan was, according to Lucy. Down is the way that makes more sense to the children. Down, said the dwarf. I know nothing about Aslan, but I do know that if we turn left and follow the gorge up, it might lead us all day before we found a place where we could cross it. Whereas if we turn right and go down, we're bound to reach the Great River in about a couple of hours. And if there are any real lions about, we want to go away from them, not towards them. Okay, what do you say, Susan? Don't be angry, Lou, said Susan, but I do think we should go down. I'm dead tired. Do let's get out of this wretched wood into the open as quick as we can. And none of us except you saw anything. Edmund? Said Peter. Well, there's just this, said Edmund, speaking quickly and turning a little red. Now, he's not red because he's mad. He's turning red because he's embarrassed, and you'll see why in just a minute. When we first discovered Narnia a year ago, or 1,000 years ago, whatever it is, it was Lucy who discovered it first, and none of us would believe her. In the first book, remember, Lucy's the one that said, "Guys, come here, I found this thing," and they wouldn't believe her. I was the worst of the lot, I know. Yet she was right after all that. Wouldn't it be fair to believe her this time? I vote for going up. Oh, Ed! Said Lucy and seized his hand, as in like, thank you for believing me. And now it's your turn, Peter, said Susan. And I do hope... Oh, shut up, and let a chap think, interrupted Peter. I'd much rather not have to vote. Yeah, but you are the High King, said Trumpkin sternly. Down, said Peter, after a long pause. I know Lucy might be right after all, but I can't help it. We must do one or the other. So they set off to their right along the edge downstream, and Lucy came last of the party, crying bitterly. Why is she so upset? Luke? Because no one believed her, and she knows she saw Aslan. And now they're walking away from Aslan, which is not what they want to do. But she's the only one who believes it. Edmund's kind of like, well, I didn't see him, but I believe it because, Lucy, you were right last time, so. So we'll see tomorrow, hopefully, if she actually saw Aslan or something else.